Fantastic. Then we can go ahead and start to begin. So, hello everyone. My name is Jack. I'm here from the Polygon Studios side of things, and I'm really excited to talk to Dogira Studios, a gaming studio that is soon to release their first fully on-chain game called Gooeys. And I would just love if all of our speakers could just kind of go over uh, who they are and what they do with the project. Open to.
Yeah, absolutely. But first off, thanks a million for having us on. We're delighted to be able to, I suppose, jump on and let the Polygon community know what we've been building over the last year, really, and about the last 6 months or so since we actually moved over onto the Polygon chain from Ethereum. So the project itself is called Gooeys, and the studio that we're building it under is called Dogira Studios. Dogira started out it was early February of last year. In that time, we originally were building a gaming SDK. This one, I suppose, was making some assumptions on Ethereum 2.0 and sharding, with the belief that we'd be looking at extreme performance improvements coming in on Ethereum over the next couple of months. And we began devising plans for a gaming SDK we could build on top of the blockchain back then. So we found obviously that Ethereum, while great improvements are being made, it wasn't getting to the level where we'd be able to run anything really in real time, or I suppose the gas costs that we're running on the network and general block times that we'd find on Ethereum. Even if we were to bring the gas price down by 100 times, we'd still be looking at quite large block times, which wasn't really able to do it for us. So after taking some time to talk about where we'll be taking the future of Dogira, what type of things we want to build on it, and looking towards getting deeper into the gaming side of it rather than just providing SDKs, we eventually began looking at Polygon. Out of all networks that we've had a look at over the last year, really Polygon has been the one that has shown, number one, it's already in excellent condition to begin running on-chain games, and number two, when we're looking at being able to run currently on the network about 100 TPS, so looking at all of the incredible improvements that are being made on, say, Snark and other technologies that Polygon is working towards, this is really what we're seeing as being the network to begin developing games that can actually run in real time on chain, which is what led us to begin building Gooeys. So just to give a quick heads up on the team ourselves, so with me is Skylar and Elijah. They're members of our community and marketing team, listening in, as well as Caroline, who is, sorry, she's up on the stage now, great. Caroline is the managing director and also the marketing director on the project. Our artist Mary is also listening in on this today, and I am the lead developer with Dogira and the studio director. So my own history in the space is back in 2013, I was working on Dogecoin itself as the first core developer. Back then, a lot of the work I did was, I suppose, more so on the actual on-chain side of it. A lot of the stuff that we would have needed to do back then was really seeing, what kind of performance can we get out of our own independent blockchain. We had to do a lot of work, and I suppose handling the parabolic growth of Dogecoin at the time, where we found that, back then multi-pooling was an extreme issue where people would, jump from pool to pool, where hash rates would go massive and then tiny, very difficult to actually keep a network stable back then. So a lot of the work back then, I suppose, is more on the lower level side of things. But after we started seeing Dogecoin take off and get a lot of hold on, I suppose, back then, what was a very large amount of people, I suppose today very small. I think the market cap back then was only about 20 million. Today it's in the billions. But our main drive for wanting to build a network back then was creating something that could have real-time utility on it. Unfortunately, technology just wasn't really there yet. A lot of the systems that we built back then had to be centralized. And of course, all the risks that came with centralization meant that a lot of project owners back then might vanish, and coins might vanish with them. There was a lot of issues with that in the space back then. Obviously, still some issues with it today, but back then, everything being centralized, it was very hard to actually build the services that we wanted to build, a lot of them in around gaming. With the advent of Ethereum, smart contracts, later then Polygon arriving in to, I suppose, add fuel into that to make it actually fast, usable, and near real time, that's when my interest started coming back in, I suppose, taking what I was looking at nearly a decade ago and bringing it forward into what we're actually building today. And a lot of that is all in around real-time gaming, on well, real-time on-chain gaming, play to earn, etc. Fully tokenized economies is something that we've really been dreaming about in the crypto space for a decade now, and it's finally come to fruition where we can actually begin building it. And the Polygon network is obviously a massive part of us being able to start doing that now. So in the last decade, between me working on Dogecoin and now, I've had the opportunity to work with some enterprise companies as a lead developer and manager, being Microsoft, Zendesk, some startups, and even the gaming space with Limbic over in Germany, where we worked on Zombie Gunship, a popular title on iOS and Android. With all of that experience behind me, now looking at actual, where blockchain technology has led us, this is the point where really we're able to take the team that we have right now and the experience that everybody has gathered over the past decade of exposure to blockchain and the emerging technologies that have come from it, to begin actually building the stuff that, again, we dreamed about 10 years ago. This is all stuff that is absolutely possible today on Polygon. And this is where Gooeys comes in, that we've built our first fully on-chain game, which is launching in 2 days' time. And that is the brief history of Dogira and Gooeys.
No, I love it. You're an absolute OG of the blockchain, so that's really exciting. I always like to ask when people have been in the space for a long time. You've seen the evolution of what's capable. What excited you about this technology in the beginning? Like, why bring a game on the blockchain? What do the players get when you do such a task? Because you have the choice to just release a regular game. What does the blockchain provide that wouldn't necessarily be available to the audience or be available to the players? And what sort of envisions did you have back then that you can kind of do now, and maybe there's something that expanded upon it in that time period as well? Just curious about that, just given your history.
Yeah, absolutely. So back then we had things like, Satoshi Dice and stuff like that, which, you wouldn't really call gaming. It was more, gambling apps and stuff like that that really ran back then. I suppose a lot of us that looked at it kind of said, if you can run a dice roll on chain and you can prove that, it's verifiably fair. Back then, a little bit more difficult. It was often, giving the actual seed that we would have, ran any random calculations with. Nowadays, we have Chainlink with VRF, making it so much easier. But back then, a lot of us looked at it and it was kind of the main reason why you'd want to move all of this stuff on chain was that fair random element. The second side of it then again was, if you looked at a lot of the games that were kind of, coming into their heyday back then, one of the biggest things that kind of caught us about online gaming was that there was always this kind of a gray market area where, people would have wanted to, say, sell their characters, sell items that they picked up. A lot of it, what has really become play to earn gaming today, a lot of standards that we're starting to see coming in. Back then, this was all kind of extremely gray market where, you would, if you wanted to pick up, say, World of Warcraft Gold or anything like that, you would log on to a website, you would give them your PayPal details, you'd pray you'd actually get it, etc. And obviously a lot of games back then, they didn't support any transactions like that. So, your account would be, your account would come into actual question on it. It wasn't allowed for players to actually trade things with, anything that's outside of direct in-game currency and stuff like that. So one general thing I've always had in that kind of market is that these industries always exist. There will always be people that will want to jump on and sell, say, in-game items or anything like that. And what always kind of got me about it was the fact that if you're a player and, you're playing, say, a game for, some people will play 40 hours a week or more, and you're creating all these experiences for other players. You're basically creating the gameplay itself. You're one of the content creators for it. An argument that I've always kind of had on that was, why can't they make a living from it if they're able to do that? And particularly when you already have an economy that would be able to support it. Now, I'm not talking about, somebody would just set up a quick dungeon finding group and charge everybody $5 to get in or anything like that. But when it comes to actually, picking up a rare item in game and then immediately not being able to trade it, sometimes not being able to trade it in game at all. And secondly, not being able to give it to a friend for, say, an item in another game or anything like that. I always found it strange how we closed off all of those economies entirely. Now, similarly, from working in the gaming industry, I do understand the challenges that are in having an open economy like that. And there are ways that it can be done off chain as well. But when you want to actually bring it in and have it, computed in a trustless fashion, where there can be economies that can coexist without needing to have, say, a watchful guardian over it and checking what you can and can't do, it all comes back to just on-chain tech. There's a lot of reasons why you would want to go directly on chain for stuff like that. So number one is if you had a popular game and there was an item in it which, let's just say it was the rarest item in the game and it cost a couple of $100 or anything like that, there is a level of trust that you need that these items can't just be spawned in at will. When you're looking at blockchain on top of that, really the technology is coming from having an open ledger on it where you can trustlessly validate that this item is actually as rare as they're stating it is. People aren't just able to spawn it in or anything like that. When you go back to kind of the origins of blockchain and you look at kind of the OG stuff that was being done back then, a lot of it kind of came down to that kind of trustless nature. What's kind of ironic in that is back then in the crypto scene, and obviously still today, there's an issue with it. But there were a lot of scam projects back then, a lot of rug pulls, stuff like that. Obviously, you still see them today, which, is something that hopefully will continue to go away over time as we see kind of more acceptance coming into the market and regulations coming in on being able to actually stop this kind of stuff. But back then, it was much worse than we had today. Back then, there wasn't really as open a ledger on it. There was so many ways that you could run through mixers, things like that back then, that if somebody was pulling a scam on a project, you would never find out who they were. There was no kind of RPC even to look back through, anything like that. Nowadays, when you're actually putting something on chain, you can assume that, the actual database structure itself is one of the largest benefits actually going on chain. It's being independently validated by, in some cases, like on the Ethereum network, I think I read today there was something like 350,000 validators that we're expecting to go on to. Polygon has a massive amount of validators as well. They're able to also, leverage off the fact that they're an Ethereum L2. It adds security on everybody's side. And when you have a completely open chain, there is no way to cheat it. And that's, for me, what blockchain kind of comes down to, and why you would want to put really everything on chain, not just gaming. I mean, gaming is one of the things that can go on chain. There's a lot that we can do with that. There's a lot of efficiency that we can actually get for putting it on chain, which is, again, so much different from 10 years ago, where all that we looked at back then was what we're sacrificing to go on chain. Now there's everything that we actually gain by bringing a game on chain. We have our verifiable fair random functions. We have an open ledger where everybody can see the absolute, they can see the absolute overview of the entire economy that you're running at any one time. The amount of services that can be built in that type of open nature, the open nature that it really forces you to embrace as a developer, it creates experiences that really you can't get off chain. It's now kind of a case of everything that you're able to get from putting a game on chain is outweighing what kind of sacrifices that there would be on it. There's design challenges still when we're looking at developing things on chain. If we look at, say, Polygon's current block time, there's about a 2-second finality on it. So, things that we develop, we have to have ways either verify it on chain in real time, or we have to say, assume that any command that we put through in it, there's going to need to be about 2 seconds that we wait for results to come back on that. The design that we kind of run with on that is, it's very simple. If you have anything that's kind of turn-based or waiting for user input, so easy to be able to just sit and wait for anything to come back on chain with it. But similarly as well, when we're looking at the fact that it's down to 2 seconds now, and we're looking at recursive proofs being, milliseconds, the technology is kind of moving to a point now where it's really just going to be limited by your ping time in a couple of years. And for us moving over onto the Polygon chain is stating that this will be like having all of the resources of dedicated servers running our game on it at a cheaper cost than we pay for bare metal. And also it will be fully open, it will be fully secure, and anybody will be able to go on and validate what we're doing at any one time. And I think when it comes to particularly play to earn economies, that is the level of visibility that you need to give your players. As this is an economy that really you need to be very hands off on as a developer, which is so different to what we would have worked with in, I suppose, more traditional experiences, we have to pretty much ensure that we're setting things up that players take it over after that. Your content creators, rather than an invisible hand that's trying to guide in-game economies. And you've got so much more to look at. Like hyperinflation is a big problem when it comes to, say, in-game economies, stuff like that. You can have hyperinflation. You can design a game to still have that on chain. But what we have right now is that it kind of forces developers to rethink all of that. That you don't want to have, like, hyperinflation is, I would say, a design bug in most games, but it doesn't really matter because it's not tied to any kind of real world stuff. It's not tied to anything apart from your game. Now that we kind of have everything running on chain and there's stuff being actually tied to it, there's a value being added to, say, items that are in the game or tokens that are in the game or coins, currency, anything like that. It forces us to design things a little bit more intelligently, to have a look at what kind of sinks do we need to level out these faucets on it. So sorry, this is kind of rambling onwards into all of the stuff that we kind of have to have a look at when it goes on chain. But I think it's very difficult to sum it up in a small sentence because it is a completely new paradigm. It's like when you look back at, say, when mobile gaming was becoming popular, well over a decade ago now. But everybody kind of assumed, we'll just get PC games or PlayStation games and we'll put it on a phone. And it never became that at all. We actually got, unique experiences on it. Yes, you can port things over and it can run like that. But anything that really did well on mobile was something that was designed and built for mobile. It was a brand new platform. And this is what we're kind of looking at with everything on chain at the moment, that this is a brand new platform. It's in an exploratory kind of stage at the moment. There's a lot of experimental stuff happening out there. And I think we're going to see essentially a new genre of gaming actually emerge from this. And right now, I believe Polygon is the best platform to do all of that work on.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm actually really glad that you brought up game economists because I was chatting with one a couple of days ago, and just sort of the challenges that become apparent when you're designing a game economy, maybe for like a big MMORPG, and then all of a sudden when it's tied to real value, like how does that change the user experience and how does that change the economist experience designing it as well? So this is very much in line with some of the things that some of the side conversations I've been having with some of our partners. I love that you talk about back then with the blockchain, there were sacrifices that you had to make, and you guys more or less thought of it as like the sacrifice to bring things on chain. Now, of course, we understand the technology a lot better and the capabilities, so that we understand a lot more of the benefits, and you've done a wonderful job going through a lot of those benefits. But wondering just very quickly as well, like how much work did it take to bring your game completely on chain in order to bring those benefits to the users here?
So a lot of it was really in the design stage. I would say that the design stage, this is kind of a standard, I suppose, with everything you build. You're going to be designing longer than you're coding. And there was a few gotchas that I suppose we found while we're bringing Gooeys fully on chain. Now, the actual design of Gooeys, like you said there, a lot of it came down to economic design and stuff like that. And once we kind of said, okay, we have everything in place we want, we know all the features we want in here for the core launch, then we kind of had to think of, what are we going to be doing in the future with it? Because you don't want to launch a game and then just say, okay, that's done and it's finished. I think games stopped working like that a long time ago. There's an expectation, particularly in an online game or really an on-chain online game, that it's going to evolve over time. There will be, new stuff added into it, and you want to be able to, give yourself and your team the ability to continue evolving and iterating on that title, while similarly respecting the fact that, once you put stuff on chain, it is immutable. If there's anything that, if you put up a game tomorrow where, you validated the code on it, and let's say it was just a game of poker or anything like that, the whole point of it being on chain is that people are going to be able to actually inspect it, and they're going to be able to make sure that, nothing is being added to it. And that's one of the benefits of being on chain. I mean, you don't want the rules of, poker changed when you have that go up on, on chain or in any platform. And then when you look at, you want to do an iterative design, how do you work with that when like, how do you bring that iterative design in when you also want to ensure that the core the core contract that you're building is immutable? It can never be changed. And that was, I suppose, one of the bigger challenges that we had. Now, there's to kind of dive into more software developer talk, there's the diamond pattern, which would often be followed when we're building kind of more complex projects on chain. And that is, there are individual components. Some parts are changeable and some parts are locked in place forever. So our core contract is immutable. It is not changeable. That is locked in place forever. But then we said, we have our ERC20, which is for our in-game currency. We also have an ERC1155, which is for, our food item NFTs. Those two are able, well, they're not changeable, but they are able to accept the fact that other contracts, which are approved by the core contract, can interact with them as well. So that was one of our kind of big design choices and challenges in it, is in making sure that we could do that in a secure fashion and make sure that, we can build new core contracts which are able to interact with, the fruit items. They're able to interact with the actual in-game currency itself. And we're able to take that and run with it and say, we're able to build completely new features now that could still interact with two of the main core features of the actual contract itself. And because they're all on chain as well, people are able to see, what's being given permission to, be able to generate new tokens or be able to, distribute fruit out to players in form of NFTs, stuff like that, to feed their Gooeys. So the challenges in design were really, I think, the biggest part of it. The technical challenges, I guess one of the largest really that I kind of encountered was coming down to the actual file size limitations that came in with Spurious Dragon. So for anybody that doesn't kind of work on on-chain stuff, whenever you're writing a contract, you have a file size limit, and it's about 24 kilobytes that you have to get all of your code inside of. Now, that's not 24 kilobytes really for you. That's 24 kilobytes for all of the standards, the security standards that you need to have in there. And you would use, Open Zeppelin contracts to make sure that you're aligning perfectly with what ERC20 would need, ERC721 would need, etc. And then you need to put all of your logic in on top of it. So the reality is you're essentially building a full game in a couple of kilobytes. And it's really like working on, at that point, it's working on nearly very retro tech that you have to look at where you can save bytes in this thing. Now, the diamond pattern helps with that a lot because you're able to have multiple contracts that you can kind of spread jobs out on. But you also have to consider the security implications. You don't want to have, 50 contracts doing the work of one contract, because essentially you've given yourself 50 things you need to make sure are secure and working alongside each other and only each other, rather than being able to look at, your core code and make sure that that is all kept behind, the closed doors that you want behind. So that, I believe, the biggest kind of, the biggest thing that we had to do on that one was coming into a point where the error messages that come, bundled with Open Zeppelin's contracts, which is, small things like, you didn't spend enough gas to do a transaction. So that's more on chain. But say if you tried to send tokens you didn't have, there's a typical error message that will come back just stating that your balance is too low to send 100 tokens, you only have 50, etc. We have to go into all of those error messages and actually change them into error codes where they were like A1 and B2, stuff like that, and make a lookup table. Because the string that we're writing the error message into, all of those strings together were taking up about a kilobyte, and we needed to save a kilobyte to get more space for what we were actually building. So yeah, we had to run around and make a lookup table for all of that just to save a couple of bytes here and there that we're able to basically stick more game logic in on top of. So yeah, it was definitely, I like how that kind of stuff, forces you to kind of think about what you're building. We don't think about space nowadays at all when it comes to any game development. And we don't even really think about it too much on mobile anymore. Back when we were, when I was with Limbic and we were developing Zombie Gunship, we had to assume for the fact of, we don't really want to be downloading more than, 100, maybe 128 megabytes onto a mobile device. Preferably we'd want to have a lot less on it. So that was kind of, 128 megabytes is very different than 24 kilobytes. Even when we had the 128, we found ways to use it. And now that we're kind of going, putting our stuff on chain, And it's understandable that, you have something on chain, you want this to be running efficiently on chain. You don't want it to take up a massive amount of space or allow people to have really unoptimized code going up there. You want this to be kind of running as efficiently as possible, because once again, this is kind of, granted we're on Polygon and gas is, way cheaper than you'd find it on other networks, but you still don't want people to be paying, double gas or anything like that, even when it's as affordable as it is. You want to get this down as low as you can, especially when you're running it across an entire network. Even if you're looking at gas costs being down as low as they can be, if you're looking at, 10,000 people running those contracts, it does all add up. And I think one of Polygon's main drivers over, the last year really that I've been using the network has been how much it has saved on gas costs across the network. So yeah, all of those technical challenges kind of play into each other as well, which again, it's kind of a fascinating way to look at things where efficiency is back in high demand. Whereas, you look at doing anything off chain and it's more, get it working, patch it later. And if it's not efficient, whatever. It's so different now.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. There's so many points that I want to bring up, but when you're building like a mobile game, you can kind of like throw whatever like code you need to get it to work, as you say. Whereas when you're doing something on chain, you don't want 50 contracts, as you say. You want to really think about it and solidify all the things that you need in one contract. It's totally different type of building when you're making like a standard mobile game versus a fully on-chain game. So I'm really happy that you went over some of the groundwork. I think that you're laying down for other games to kind of think about as they build, and we're all sort of learning at the same time, which is really beautiful. But yeah, the transaction fees, I mean, Sandeep has said himself that, Web3 for all, and I think that having low fees is part of it. But let's talk a lot. Let's talk a little bit more about the game itself, because we can probably go on about the history of blockchain and the future of it for a whole separate AMA. But let's talk about this game that is coming out on Sunday, Gooeys. I've pinned a couple of the a little bit of the artwork up top. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about the functions of the game. Curious about feeding them the fruit. Yeah, I'd love to hear more about it.
Yeah. So Gooeys, we started developing that. I suppose we were looking at, general virtual pets and stuff like that. And I suppose it kind of took on life of its own then, where we started, what started as something which was more like, just, maybe you'll feed it and maybe you can pat it and stuff like that. Obviously there's already a lot of stuff like that out there. We were looking at stuff like Avogotchi, all really good games that kind of did this stuff before. And we said, what can we kind of bring to this that will be new and actually, something that really needs to be on chain? And a lot of it then came down to, I suppose, expanding that outwards, wanting to bring all of the stuff in that, you'd find in a regular game, and how we're able to add expansions onto it, have it as more of a live service type thing where we can iterate. And then I suppose, developing the actual core functionality itself, like what do we want to do with these essentially virtual pet creatures that we can, make different. And a lot of it came into, we want to have this fully tokenized economy that actually runs around them. It's something that, we're not seeing a massive amount of lately. We've seen on-chain games sometimes have to have, a lot of logic needs to be done on dedicated servers and stuff like that. Because, if you want to get absolute real time without getting, 100 transactions in on it, then there might be the need for a dedicated server to go in the middle of it. So we said, well, we don't want to do that. We don't want to look at dedicated resources for this one. We want to put everything on chain. Like absolutely everything has has an emission to follow it. Everything is being done on chain. So that was kind of one of the main building blocks of it, that if we want to put everything on chain and we have an emission on everything that we do, and that allows us to build this kind of fully tokenized economy, what do we actually want the creatures to be able to do then, just outside of just being fed and stuff like that? So the first thing that we devised on it was the questing system. So questing it runs basically in the background on a calculation that is based on the stats that your Gooey is given at the point of minting or at the point of tumbling or breeding, as we call it, or breeding or tumbling, as we call it. So doing this basically allows us to have a questing system in game, which is done based off your on-chain stats. So this is fully on-chain. It's not being read in from an oracle or hosted on a JSON site that we have to pull the data down from. When your GUI is minted or when it's tumbled, you are basically calling the Chainlinks verifiable random function, and that gives you all the stats of your GUI, including your cosmetics. So this is all done absolutely in real time on chain. That this, the images that you see on all of the GUIs, all of the NFTs, they weren't, pre-built or anything like that. The actual sprites themselves and all the parts were pre-made, but we set up at that point what we called our NFT kit, which is basically listening to emissions on chain. You basically create your new GUI, you mint it, or you tumble or breed a new one, and then Chainlink is immediately called to figure out all the stats that your GUI is meant to have. That comes to cosmetics, and it comes to actual attributes such as your health, your attack, your speed, and your defense. All of those stats are stored on chain forever. And the only way to ever get different stats on that is to breed two GUIs. So once you have all of that on chain, verified by Chainlink, and you're able to go off on quests with it, we were able to then start begin building an actual economy that can, work around all of that. So when you go out on a quest, you basically have a set amount of hours that quest will take, and your success chance comes down to number one, the type of quest that you picked, and then number two, the actual stats that your GUI has. The different quest tiers that are in there right now at our launch, we're expecting that it'll be difficult to go beyond tier 3 for any what we're calling the generation 0 GUIs, the 1000 that were minted. To go beyond that, that's the point where you're going to have to look at actually, breeding new GUIs with, stats that will kind of go beyond what we would have seen in generation 0. The breeding is done all fully on chain as well. So again, you get, two GUIs, you get their stats, you can take essentially a midpoint between them or a random chance between the two stats on it, and then a mutation chance is added on top of that as well. Typically, you'd be looking at GUIs each generation coming out about between 50% and 90% more powerful than you would see on the generation beforehand. So there's a massive incentive to actually pick up GUIs that have good stats on it to essentially train up their Nexus stat, which allows them to get an additional mutation on top of that, and essentially just breed more powerful generations as you go on to be able to undertake the quests that are coming forward with it. So that is kind of the core side of GUIs. Then we did include the fruit in there. So the fruit is where you're able to get that additional Nexus points from, and the fruit is also where you're able to get additional rounds of breeding, or again tumbling as we call it. So once you have all of that in place, it allows you to kind of have this more full ecosystem with it. So you've got questing where you're able to pick up both the GOO token and you're able to pick up fruit from that. You're also able to use the GOO token to buy additional fruit in the in-game store that we have. You can also pick it up on an aftermarket such as OpenSea if you prefer to go through it that way. And we also have support for our Dogira token on the first week of launch, where you're able to essentially burn the Dogira token and be able to pick up the fruit NFTs in game with that then. So that is the core concept of GUIs. You've got the food system, you've got Nexus for improving the GUIs that you're able to develop in the future. We've got the actual breeding system itself. We've got all of the on-chain random stats with it, and we've got the actual questing system to tie it all together then. So yeah, there's a lot going in there for a day one release, but like we've said a few times now, this is only the core release that we're doing. This is the core logic that we want to get in running on there. The amount of stuff we have planned kind of outside of that then is much more enormous. This build is probably going to be the longest one that we've, pushed out from anything that we'll kind of create, because this was the one that needed all of the, massive security work done on it. Everything needed to be double checked. Everything needed to, go on chain and be verified. Building from here then, once we have, that core contract and all those core security functions in place, we'll be able to really take it to kind of like dizzying heights once it comes beyond that one. Like particularly, sorry, go on.
No, I love that. I just wanted to touch upon like the fact that I love that these GUIs are dynamic and that they evolve and change and are only getting stronger. What does that sort of look like in terms of how your title is going to be designed and evolve and grow over time with these GUIs? If they're getting stronger, are the quests going to get harder? What's the design like in the longer term there?
Yeah, so that was where a lot of, I guess, the economic planning came down on that. We had to make sure that, yes, they're going to get stronger. So at what point could this kind of get dangerous? If you had somebody who was playing for 4 years and, they have, obviously, they've got a generation 50 GUI running out and it's able to kind of, run through everything. Do we have a sufficient reward for that kind of stuff? Or would the reward be so high at that stage that it would nearly, basically take on the economy by itself? You essentially, you don't want Warren Buffett running around inside your game with every asset in the world at, their disposal. So yeah, a lot of the economic planning came down to kind of looking at that stuff and saying, how are we going to evolve the title kind of outwards? We're able to do this stuff. And that came down to basically designing what was a worst case scenario or an extreme case scenario, in that, let's say, this essentially Warren Buffett Gooeys did exist and they had 50 or 100 or, 20% of the supply of Gooeys. What's going to actually be the worst case scenario that this comes down to? So we had to design that out and have a look at, how can, number one, how do we kind of, disincentivize, I suppose, that level of, control over an economy? And number two was supposed to make it so that if you did want to run down that route and, you genuinely wanted to try and pick up 20% of, the GUIs that are in the game itself, can we ensure that it's still going to be fun for other people at that point? That, you're going to feel like you're getting something, you're going to feel like you have, the level of success that you'd imagine you'd get from any game where you're able to do that in, while also not destroying it on other people. And I guess that's the kind of challenge we've always had when it comes to online gaming, that you get people who, would more casually play and they're sharing a space with what you call your hardcore players. And there shouldn't be a point where the hardcore players are essentially able to just run over all of the newbies that come into the game, because the newbies will leave. But similarly, a hardcore player should not also be put up against somebody who is day one in the game and feel like, they're evenly matched at that point. It's, there's a level of power creep you have to allow for, and then there's a level of it that you have to, block. So a lot of that came down to designing for these extreme case scenarios, and that's where kind of the on-chain stuff became very important. That when you have that kind of economy being set up, if, say, for example, we didn't think about this stuff and somebody did run off and they picked up, 20% of all the GUIs, and they were essentially an in-game god at that stage, we can't change that. If the economy was designed to allow that to happen, then we have to evolve around that kind of stuff. It shouldn't happen in the first place. We should be able to sit there and kind of plan that stuff out. But if, stuff like that does happen and we see people that do get to that level of power, the game needs to be designed around that kind of stuff. And that's what we've always kind of called Gooeys an evolving title, that while we do plan out for all of these kind of extreme cases, players will quite often find a way to surprise you with the ways that they play. Now, economic design, thankfully, mostly just comes down to just general math. You can look at, what is the maximum amount of rewards that somebody could get from running every quest in Gooeys at the same time with absolutely perfect play, that, they're not missing a second, they're jumping in every time. And that's what we had to design for. We had to look at, the extremes to say, if somebody does actually do this, what way will the economy go over time? And that was kind of a lot of what we had to work on to, I suppose, allow for that kind of stuff. A lot of it kind of came down to the economic design of stating, when people are playing games, particularly when they're on chain, you will often find that you will get perfect players. I think one thing that we found on that was when, we did case studies over past projects, and one of the games that we had a look at, and obviously we noticed when it was happening at the time, was with Sunflower Farms, that the way to be a perfect player in that was to send through as many transactions on chain as you possibly could at any one time. So that's kind of one thing that we had to look at. If we make the game in a sense that, you can be better or you can get more rewards out of it, the harder you hit the network, then we're going to see the network come down. And that's kind of the type of forethought that you have to put into this kind of stuff. That while on-chain gaming is its own paradigm in itself, you do have to respect the actual platform that you're on as well. That, if you're tying progress to constant activity on the network, the reality is you slow down the network and you might cause that network to, come to an actual stall on it. So a lot of the economic design came into looking at the overall system that we're building into and maintaining that ability to be able to, I suppose, pivot around what players are actually doing in the future on it. So we don't want people to, just completely run out of content either when they are able to, do the highest tier quests and stuff like that. And that's where the actual expansions come into it. As I said before, that whole, diamond pattern development that we did, it allows us to build in new features as we move along. And on top of that, we've also kind of set it for ourselves that the economy that we're building, hyperinflation is always a concern for anybody, in regular gaming, it's a concern for the economies in there. But we have to kind of set it up from the start that we're looking at the emissions slowing over time. And our actual token contract actually has halving logic in it. Every 2 months, the emissions will be halved. So if you're doing, the highest tier quest today, in 2 months' time, that is only going to be giving half the rewards in the actual Goo tokens. So this is something that we have to, as a team ourselves, keep designing around. That, the current features that are in the game on day one will not be getting the same rewards in 2 months' time, and it'll be getting even less in 4 months' time. Stuff going on from there. So as a team, we have to sit down and say, what are we bringing in now that, this content is getting old hat? We want to move players on from that, give them something new to actually do in game. But there's two sides of it. One is keeping the economy, fresh, keeping things moving, keeping new things coming in it. The second thing is actually keeping the experience fresh. You don't want players doing the same thing every single time they log in for a year or 2 years or anything like that. You have to be able to provide content. And that's kind of one of the reasons why we went with the halving system in the end, that those systems that are in place right now that are going up on, day one for launch, it's in the core contract. We can't change the actual quests that are in there. So we have to sit there and make sure that the content we have planned is going to basically be able to evolve on the design iterations that we have. And say, we have to have new content out. And we have a halving coming up on this day. This is how the economy is looking at the moment. How are we going to run with that? Similarly as well, it also gives us, I suppose, a little bit of breathing room from the design point when we're actually able to look at this and say, okay, emissions are actually coming in, close to the high end that we have planned for. There is a halving coming up. So that's kind of something that we can look at and say, well, it's kind of a soft reset for our economy every time that happens. Now, obviously, we have to, we can't just kind of jump in and state, oh, we'll just leave it halve every time and we won't look at it from there. It will be halving every time regardless. But the important part is that we make sure, if people are feeding their Gooeys and they're using, the Goo token to pick up fruit and stuff like that, we don't want it so that, a new player is no longer able to, get fruit from in-game activities and stuff like that. So, yeah, it's a constant kind of, it's an economy that needs to evolve with the need for the actual player experience. So while the Go emissions themselves are devolving, we have to have a look at, what's actually evolving on the gameplay side of it. So new mechanics and new systems need to come in to make up for all of that. I think that's one of the more kind of exciting parts about building it, that we've, I suppose, set our own internal timers for, when the economy is going to have this minor soft reset, and for when we need to be able to jump in at that with our new content then, and be able to, I suppose, design these new features to match where we would like to see the economy be in line with in terms of general emissions. So it's extremely interesting, and it's something that I suppose it's a very evolving kind of pattern that we're working with. It's something that I think will be fascinating to see how it kind of plays out over the course of a year or 2 years.
Yeah, wonderful. And it also kind of like speaks to, I think, the longevity of the game, that you're already thinking about these sort of items, and that you're sort of set a time-sensitive capsule of when these features need to roll out. I also just, in general, I think like the game's going to be worth paying attention to for the long run, because we've just talked so much about the economy and so much about the design, and that there are a lot of these broader, more in-depth thoughts going into this game. It's not just a simple sort of like you get to pet your Gooey, feed him some fruit. There's a lot going on to engage, and it'll continue to evolve. One of the things that I did want to bring up is the Gooey NFTs themselves. They were generated by Dogira's NFT Kit, which is the in-house platform for the NFT creation with Chainlink. Going into those randomized attributes. I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit more about the platform itself, and a little bit more about the relationship to the Chainlink VRF.
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose the first thing I would actually say when speaking about the NFTs is the artwork. And so Mary, our artist, I believe she's listening in at the moment. So she designed all of the actual Gooeys that we have on the NFTs and in game. And I think that's kind of been the biggest thing that everybody has kind of said to us, or rather the first thing that people say to us when they look at Gooeys is just how fantastic the artwork is, how they all actually work together, how we're able to have, God, we counted it up at one stage. I think it was something like 350 million different possible combinations of Gooeys that you could have. And like, again, I suppose I'm very biased. I look at this kind of, as being on the actual project floor with it. But I think that a lot of them, they look bespoke. They look like somebody sat down and drew them all individually, one by one. Whereas, these are all individual parts that are being put onto them. They're all, they're all permutation based. There are 7 different layers that run onto it, 5 changeable layers that run through the actual Chainlink VRF side of it. So yeah, the art on it is something that I think really kind of stands to the vision of what we're building in, in the actual long term, that this wasn't stuff to be kind of chopped out quickly. Now, granted, our artists did it very quickly considering the amount of work that was involved with it, but there was no scrimping on quality at all. Like, this went through a very iterative design, and I think that speaks to how we want to do everything at Dogira when it comes to actual games that we build and comes to the products that we actually build from ourselves as well. We want this to be stuff that, looks like the quality in it is at the level where we want it to be at. So the actual NFT kit itself, so Chainlink VRF is how, for anybody who is not aware, VRF is a verifiable random function. It's a random number generator that you call on chain, and everybody can prove that it is random. They can see the actual emission coming out from it. They can see the actual, the actual computations that happen on top of that mat as well. And they're able to state that, without a shadow of doubt, this random number was fairly picked. So while that is brilliant to have on chain, you cannot do image generation on chain. Well, you can to an extent, but you certainly wouldn't be able to do it to, I suppose, the level that Gooeys are at, where, each raw image, I believe, in PNG format, it's well over a megabyte. You're talking 1400 by 1400. And like I was stating before, with on-chain limitations, you're looking at 24 kilobytes maximum going up. If you have, a couple of hundred or a couple of thousand images going on there, it's not going to work very well for you. So we get the random number coming in from Chainlink VRF. So the minute that you get that random number, on-chain, your GUI is fully built. It knows what cosmetics that it has based off the random number generator, and it knows what attributes it has, such as, health, speed, attack, etc. So in order to actually, give you your representation of that GUI, we have our NFT kit, which is running, it's a bespoke piece of software we built and it's running on dedicated hardware. And we have that listening to the actual on-chain emissions at all times. So the minute that the on-chain emissions come back and shout out, this GUI has, 500 health, 400 strength, and it has, this particular body, it has this mask, it has these ears, the NFT kit picks up on it within about 1 or 2 seconds, and it begins generating that image in real time on dedicated hardware. So it takes all of the layers that we've kind of pre-built it with, and it's able to generate that, unique NFT then, which, there's only a 1 in about 350 million chance that has ever been seen before. So essentially, a brand new GUI is being developed on the fly and then being generated with that. The image then, so the image URL is actually being loaded in advance. So we know what ID your GUI is going to be. That's emitted from chain as well. So, you put through to Chainlink VRF and you've minted a new NFT, let's call it 1001. And we already know that, this is ID 1001, this is the health, these are the cosmetics that need to be put onto it. So therefore, on chain, it already knows that this is going to be the image at 1001.jpg or anything like that. So it knows where to start looking for it. And all it has to do is basically wait for our NFT kit to generate that image, put it in the location that it's expecting it to be in, and then that's it. It's fully on-chain RNG from that, while being able to use dedicated resources for, I suppose, the very heavy lifting, but having it all validated on-chain. So you know exactly what's on-chain is exactly what you're seeing in the actual image itself. When it comes to the breeding and tumbling, it gets a little bit more interesting on that one then. So if you have 2 GUIs with, say, rare attributes or anything like that, and you decide to tumble them or breed the 2 of them, you have about an 80% chance of that trait actually being inherited in a cosmetic. So if you wanted to say, it's something we found quite funny that a lot of, there's obviously a lot of people, aiming for all of the rare Gooeys that are coming out because we really developed rare to be rare. We have some legendary traits in there. Out of all 1,000 generation zero mints, none of the legendaries showed up on it. The chances are extremely low. We have the actual, I suppose, the chance table. You can read it on our Git book, or as we call our Goo book, and the chances of getting a legendary cosmetic are extremely low. So if you do actually pick up, a rare on it, and rares again are very low as well, it's only a couple of percentage you can get one. We're obviously seeing that a lot of people want to pick up those rares, and then they want to start, breeding those Gooeys, start passing down those rare traits onto them. And what's kind of funny coming from that one is that because we developed the actual inheritable trait system, we could see this doing a U-turn where everybody is breeding the rare Gooeys, meaning that the common Gooeys are not being breeded into a new generation. So the common cosmetics may actually become the rare cosmetics from that. So it's an interesting play on design that is fully player driven. It's 100% up to the players if they want that to happen, if they want to see all of, the rare traits become common, or, if people decide they need to breed these common Gooeys in order to keep them common, stuff like that. Doesn't the other side of it then is like, the actual attributes like health and speed and stuff like that. That stuff is all completely separate to cosmetics. So you could have a Gooey that has completely common cosmetics, but has the rarest actual stats in the entire game. So at that point, do you continue breeding for, attribute strength, or do you start breeding that to say, you want to get them some rare parts in the generations moving forward, stuff like that. So a lot of it is going to come down to kind of, how the players dictate that will work. The cosmetic side of it is something we want to pay a bit more attention to in the actual expansions that are going to be coming forward in the future. But, it's obviously all on chain. We can do game logic with the cosmetics that you have. So if we wanted to say, just for example, if we wanted to make individual tribes of Gooeys or anything like that, we could base it off certain cosmetics. Like, essentially, one of the cosmetics we have is, we have Gooeys that can have, I think it's pizza that they can have across their head. So we could essentially make the pizza tribe where we can essentially make all of these Gooeys fall into one tribe because they all have pizza on their heads, and we can develop actual gameplay from that then. So this is all kind of stuff that we're looking at working with, in the future going forward. That's kind of the benefit of having everything on chain. We can actually talk about ideas like that and implement them without needing to kind of take anything off chain. It's all already in there. And, the actual ABI itself, where we're able to, that's something that everybody will be able to get a hold of, where they can, call the attributes on chain and stuff like that. But people will be able to make their own tools that run by that as well. We're able to do lookups and, even data analysis across all of the Gooeys that are out there at the moment. So yeah, there's a lot in there that comes down to both the actual cosmetic side of it and I suppose just the pure NFT side of it with the Gooeys themselves. Yeah.
No, I love that. That's I think one of the most exciting parts of your project was the Chainlink VRF aspect. The fact that it's all random. The exciting part is that it's random, because then that relies heavily on how players get to interact with the game, and it sounds like a lot of these features are going to be all sort of driven by the players. And we as this game is launched very soon, and we'll talk about that in just a moment, but as this game is launched and people start to get in and start to play, start to interact with things in different ways, I mean, you'll start to see things that you didn't even think of start to happen, which is I think very exciting. I love talking to the game designers, because I feel like they're the Mad Hatters on the project, where they start to devise new ways. It's absolutely true, right? You can be Mad Hatters. You have these wild dreams, and I think this is what I love about game designers a lot, is that they have wild dreams. But ultimately the players will find a way to find their own fork of this project that you didn't even imagine. And that, I think, like, I really love the play that I see between players and game designers. In particular, I love that dynamic. But let's talk a little bit about, as we wrap up the hour, just how do people find this wonderful game that enables them to have all these random attributes? How do we get them to you?
Yeah, so I think you have it stickied up above. You have our actual Gooeys Twitter. You can follow that one onto gooeys.io, and that's where we'll be able to actually launch the game from come Sunday night. You'll be able to pick up Gooeys on OpenSea. So all 1,000 Generation Zero Gooeys have been minted out. We minted them all out in, I think it was about 9 days that they did a full mint out during, which was, an absolutely incredible show of support from everybody who was following the project. The only way to generate new Gooeys is by other players breeding them. So this is kind of where you were saying that, the game design side of it, of getting the Mad Hatter stuff in, we want it to be fully player driven. We've kind of given it the wheels, and now it's kind of like, we've put all the rules that are generally in place on it, and it's up to the players how it all evolves from here. So we're going to see these Gooeys, new Gooeys appearing on chain. And we've also, our economic design came into that as well. We said that if there's only 1,000 Generation Zero Gooeys, then, people who picked up their Gooey probably wouldn't be too happy if the next day there were 100,000 and there's no floor price anymore. So this is something that we've put into our actual project design, that making a new Gooey, it's not something you'll be able to do, very quickly. You have to pick up the actual Gooey in game to be able to, tumble a new one. So this is the general basis behind it, that to tumble a new Gooey, you have to get two Gooeys, put them in a tumbler, shake them together, throw Gooey in on top, and your new Gooey pops out then with the attributes that it's inherited from both of its parents. So once a new Gooey is actually tumbled, a lot of players said, they might want to double up on the amount of quests that they're actually doing, or, they might want to bring new players into the fray on it. So the actual, I suppose, the gated part of the economy is actually on the player's side as well. The actual growth of the game fully depends on all of the players. I mean, we could see this, take off on Sunday, and the players decide, you know what, no, we're keeping all of the Gooeys for ourselves. And then that's it. We have to sit there and just allow that economy to plow on as it is. So yeah, hopefully you'll be able to pick one up off OpenSea either today, or you'll be able to pick up tomorrow or on Sunday, or moving on from there. But yeah, you might need to get onto our players and tell them to put up a Gooey for you. So it's all completely in their control. Once the game gets launched, it's 100% on them.
I love that it's truly player driven. So it's kind of like the designer gets to play with the players as well in the design. Thank you so much for your time today, Owen. Thank you, Dogira Studios. Gooeys is out on Sunday. Please find them, join their Discord, follow them. They're Mad Hatters in there. You can only add to.